Hello YouTube, Jerry Kirkpatrick here. Before we get started on this second part of this project, I would like to thank Larry Strayer for becoming my very first Patreon. So thank you, Larry, I appreciate it. So it didn't become apparent in that last video that when I was showing you this bracket that I finished up, that I was showing it to you black on a black background. Sorry about that. So here you can see the bracket complete. Here are the pieces of angle iron that this portion will slide in. Here's the pin that a hairpin will go in to secure it on there, and you can see here that the cable is affixed in this area here, and that more aligns with the two straps that will be bolted to the beam, and these will be carrying almost all of the weight right in line with the pulley. So this portion of the video is going to be making a mating piece that will be bolted onto the bottom of the hoist that will slide into the part that I just showed you. And now comes my favorite part, buying a brand new tool and then tearing it apart for no apparent reason. So let me get some bolts out of here, get this top cover off, and I'll be right back. So here we have the two pieces, the mounting bracket, which also has a bearing in this end which captures a little nub on the end of the shaft here. The only place that the hoist itself is mounted is in these two holes. The end of the shaft is supported by these two bolts here. And as I mentioned, these back here are doing almost nothing at all. What they have used for making the bolts thread into this are nutserts, and there's two in the front here, right by the snout, and then two in the back. These two here bolt right to the hoist itself. If you notice on the area right where the nutsert is, these are proud of this surface. So I'm going to measure the outside of each of these nutserts and drill the holes in the brackets that will be bolted down here to match the OD of the nutsert. That way I have one smooth surface that everything will be bolted to. So let's get to cutting some material and welding and drilling. Here we have the top part of the hoist mount. There will be two pieces of angle iron welded on each side here. I also want to use some lifting eyes, and in order to use these, to screw these in, I'm going to take a piece of 3/8 bar stock and weld it on the inside of the tube, and these eyes have 1/2-13 threads on them, and with the 3/8 and the 1/8 inch, that gets me almost 100% purchase on these. So I want these bolts, these eye bolts, in about 1 inch from each end. So I'm going to measure in 1.5 inches and drill a 3/8 hole, slide the 3/8 bar stock in there, and then just plug weld it. And if you notice, I always use a copper hammer for center punching and for chisel work. So let me get these 3/8 holes drilled and filed on the inside so the strap will sit flush from the bottom. So now I've got the 2 plug weld holes made, and what I used was the DeWalt Pilot Point drill, and if you use those on sheet metal and on thinner material, you get almost no burr whatsoever. So I've got a center line mark on both of these holes. I took and put a center line mark on this piece, so I can just slide that in there. Get the other end up. I'm just using a couple of wooden wedges. I'm going to center it by feel, and then get the lines lined up. Okay, we're lined up. Got the wedges in there fairly tight. Let me turn the Healy arc on, and we'll put a rosette weld in here. So I've got the 2 holes drilled for the tapping and countersunk fairly well. And first I'm going to use a starting tap, and then I'll go to a plug tap and straighten the threads out. The lead on a starting tap is fairly long, and I think by the time I hit the bottom, I won't have cleared the bottom of that 3/8. That's the purpose for using the 2 taps. And here we have the piece drilled, tapped, and the lifting eyes in place. So here we have the top piece with the holes drilled and tapped for the lifting eyes. The next thing to do is weld on these two pieces of angle iron that will slide into the upper portion. So if you were asking why I elected to TIG weld this piece instead of MIG welding it, this surface, which is the bottom, has to be perfectly flat. So if I MIG welded it, I would have had a lot of grinding to do to get the surface as flat as I wanted it. And here you can see how my welds are right where I wanted them put, and they overlap. This one is extra long here. Here's the short, so that weld is coming up into here. And this one is extra long, so it's overlapping this area here. So let's get on to the three straps that go underneath this and will bolt to the hoist itself. So here are the three straps that will be bolted to the base of the hoist, and they have to be 5 inches long. And I just found these pieces of scrap outside in my overstock where I have a bunch of stuff, and I've made a drawing of these straps, and it gives me the place for the holes and where the edge of the 1x2 tube with the angle iron is going to be 1.25 inches in. So I want to mark these for being 5 inches long. I'll be cutting these off in the cutoff saw. That way. I want to make sure that those ends are up tight. Now I'm going to put a small tack on these three, right in between. So when I make one cut, I cut all three at the same time. Okay, now that I've got them tacked, I'll take them over to the saw and cut them off. I'll be right back. All three pieces cut to length and deburred the end that I just cut and tack welded on the same side at both ends. So these are basically a solid block now, so when I drill, all of the holes will line up for sure. Now I'm going to lay out for the holes, and I'm going to do it in two different ways. One is just by using a set of calipers. The other one will be cutting a pattern that I've drawn up in the computer. So, and for both of these ways, what you're going to need is a optical center punch. I got this one back in the 80s from the fellow that was making them. He was Bill Perry. You can buy them now. I found them on McMaster Car, and they're kind of pricey, 60 bucks or so. I think I paid $35 for this, but it was from the guy that was manufacturing. No telling who's making them now. But it has a little viewfinder that you look through. This one has a very small dot on the end with a circle around it like a bullseye. The one that they have at McMaster Car now, you get two of these apparently, one with the little bullseye and another one of these with the crosshair. So you find your mark with this, pull it out. This one here is a center punch. You switch it over to the other side and strike it with your copper mallet, and you are just dead on. I mean, it's amazing how close. I have center punched and drilled separate parts, and you can still put a dowel pin down through the hole if you're careful on how you line these up. The other thing is I have a pair of calipers here, and you'll notice, let me put a piece of paper back here, that one of the anvils is shorter than the other. And the purpose for that is if you set up your calipers and the ends are the same, when you have to lean it over, you're losing some of the width. If you can put it straight down, then you know you're marking exactly where the mark should be. If you have to tilt it over, it shortens this up. So this is 1.5 inch material. So I'm going to set my calipers at 750 thousandths. And now I can keep my calipers straight and draw a line. And you can get these like for 20 bucks at any store near your harbor. Just get them home, grind them off at an angle, make sure that that's pretty sharp. So my first line from this end is 525 thousandths. And instead of measuring to the second one, I'm going to use my optical center punch. Find the center of the crosshair, take the optical out, put the center punch in, and there's my first center punch mark. Now the distance between the two is 3 inches, 950 thousandths. Put one of them right in the center punch mark and scribe my second line. Find that with the optical center punch. Now these holes are exactly the proper distance apart. This is the way I used to make my punch press dies. I would have 3 pieces together like this. I would have the die material, the stripper, and then the punch holder. So I knew that all 3 of those pieces were exactly lined up. And then the second way to lay this out, I make a drawing, and I use a drawing application called Draft Site, and it's free. You can find it on the internet, download it for $100 more. You can get their upgraded version, and it gives you bolts, all the bolts, well, fasteners in general, nuts, bolts, washers, all of that stuff, electrical symbols. It's a pretty neat program. Next, I just used some old rubber cement, just like you used in kindergarten for making your mom and dad some really neat stuff. I'm just going to put a little bit on each end. Usually if I'm going to be keeping this there, I would put glue on the whole thing, but I'm only using this for marking. So I can get this exactly squared up. Once again, use the optical center punch. Find the crosshatch. And there you have 2 different ways of laying out a piece. So now that I've got these laid out, I'll go drill the holes and be right back. And here it is with the holes blown in it. Very slight burr here. I sharpened my drill somewhat flatter than what would be normal, so I don't get those big rags on the breakout side. And if you were wondering why I made my tacks on one side, well, here's another little tip for you. I have this chisel that is ground only on one side, one taper. This side is fairly flat, but this side I have it at about a 45 degrees. This thing is excellent for cutting the heads off of rivets. If you've ever had a piece that you've made and then pop riveted together and then need to take those rivets out, when you use a drill, the rivets have a tendency to just spin. If you make a chisel like this, sharpened only on one side, you can set this right under the head of the rivet, give it a wrap, and it'll just shear that right off. Use a little prick punch and knock those off. So the reason I only weld this on one side is I can set these up, have my taper to this side, and just that easy, they come apart. Now I'll set it to the other side for no particular reason other than I can. Now I've got my parts separated. I'll go on the belt sander, dress these corners up, and I'm going to go over on the drill press and countersink, well, not countersink, but break all of the edges, get rid of all the burrs on all 12 holes, 4 each. 2 on the front, 2 in the back. That makes 12. So we have all of the pieces drilled. This one in the center bolts right to the hoist itself. These 4 have those nutserts in them, and the portion of the nutsert that sticks on this side is a little bit proud of this surface. So I took and just countersunk both ends of each one, and now they fit nice and snug on the top of the piece when you get them in place like that. So now that we've got these 3 pieces fitted and not installed but in place, I'm thinking that this video is going quite long, so I've decided to make a third portion where we'll finish this up. We'll take the top piece that will slide in to the cradle that'll be up in the rafters. We'll be welding this in place. We'll be making the little bracket, I guess you'd call it, that will be welded onto the end, that when this piece slides in, the pin on the upper portion will protrude through this hole, and then I can put a hairpin in there, and it will be pretty much affixed in place, and I won't have to worry about it sliding off and bonking me. So if you have enjoyed watching this build up to this point, consider signing up on Patreon. That'll help the channel out, get me some more lights, and hopefully get a better sound system in here. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. See you later.